And welcome back. It's time for another big story here. Now, Nigeria's fight against insurgency and banditry has been a long and arduous journey, marked by both victories and also painful losses. However, recent events have shown a stark light on the darker side of its battle. Accidental airstrikes by the Nigerian Air Force that have tragically claimed civilian lives. Now, reports of such incidents raise critical questions about operational strategies, intelligence accuracy, and the safeguards in place to prevent such catastrophic errors. The consequences of these erroneous airstrikes extend far beyond the immediate loss of life, eroding public confidence in the military and raising concerns about the collateral damage of combating insecurity. Now, this latest tragedy underscores the urgent need for transparency and also accountability in the military operations. It also highlights the delicate balance between neutralizing threat and protecting innocent lives in conflict zones.
And so joining us to explore this complex and emotional issue is David Nwaigwe. He's an analyst at SBM Intelligence, an organization renowned for its insightful research on security and policy issues in Nigeria. David, thank you so much for coming on. Let's just get started, shall we? I mean, intelligence is critical in military operations, but we've seen lapses over time that have now led to, tragic airstrikes. Let's start with, is there a lack of intelligence, and what then, how then can we ensure better accuracy when it comes to targets and just making sure that the intelligence is right and is leading to the proper targets?
Yeah, good morning, and thank you for having me.
Thanks for
Yes, to answer your question, there are incidences that could happen that could lead to lapse of intelligence. Now, there are several ways this lapse of intelligence could occur. One of those ways is when there is poor communication. Yeah, for example, say the source of intelligence is a human source, and maybe the source didn't provide sufficient information about the nature of the targets and the specific identifiers, especially in a situation where there are several other similar targets around the area. You could see these sorts of tragedies happening. Another instance where these types of tragedies could happen is when there are technological failures, right? Now, when the government, we all know that the aircraft that most of the Nigerian military use are not really state-of-the-art, so to say. So when there are technical issues with the communication systems or the data processing software, all these types of incidents could happen. Also, there is also the issue of insufficient resources. So when there are lack of inadequate manpower or technology or the bombs that are used, so all these kind of failures could lead to incidents where we have the tragedy such as the one we had in Zamfara State recently. Also, there's also the issue of poor training, right? Mm-hmm. So when the personnel are poorly trained, they are not able to properly collect, process, and analyze intelligence. All these incidents could happen. Now, you talked about ways to improve accuracy. So the most obvious way would be to invest in the intelligence gathering and analysis process and systems. So that means you have to buy better drones, you have to improve your algorithms. All these types of improvements could help to ensure better accuracy. Also, there has to be better training. So in the battlefield, weapons are constantly developing. So you need to ensure that your staffs are able to utilize these weapon systems and to apply them in battlefield scenarios. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, there's a budget presentation that's ongoing, right? And there's also arguments that they need to increase the budget, the allocations to the military to get equipment and, the right drones, the proper equipment to have state-of-the-art equipment when it comes to intelligence gathering and then still train. Is this justified, given, the last 2 years or even the administration before this, the allocations that's given to them? Have they implemented it? Has there been a bit of transparency, or is this a budget issue or money issue?
So, there might have been some allocation that have been made, but obviously, since we continue having these types of incidents keep reoccurring, it obviously means that there is a breakdown there is a problem somewhere. So the fact that all of these are being done, money is being allocated, and yet we still have incidents such as this reoccurring, it could probably mean that, okay, the money is not going where it's meant to go, or it could probably mean that the personnel who are supposed to use this equipment are not properly trained to be able to handle such equipment. Either way, there is a problem somewhere that needs to be faced, obviously.
All right, now, David, let's look at the instances that have been happening recently. Collateral damage has been as a result of airstrikes. It would seem that the Nigerian army has resorted to airstrikes, maybe because boots on the ground aren't really effective. I'm not sure. I'm just postulating this, putting it forward. However, if they've turned to airstrikes and the inaccuracy with which we're recording deaths nowadays, what does that point to? Does it point to perhaps maybe that that's not the best use of force? Would you suggest a different kind of force, perhaps maybe getting into these communities and taking out the insurgents one by one, which might have been their former strategy? But what do you suggest so that we don't continue to see these kinds of collateral damage from airstrikes, which seem to target not just the insurgents, but also people that are around them?
Okay, so for there are obviously different operational environments that the Nigerian military might have to deploy aircraft rather than foot soldiers. So when you have an ongoing operation in a very remote and vast expanse of space, such as we have in northern Nigeria, obviously the time to deploy and it takes much longer, right? So in such instances, using the aircraft or using the Air Force makes more sense. So when we talk about the collateral damage that is happening, it's not merely because it's not just that this collateral damage is happening, right? There have also been several instances where the aircraft have been used to successfully engage and neutralize these terrorists and bandits. So it's not just a question of, okay, should we stop using the Air Force or should we use the foot soldiers? It's about operational efficiency. It's about how can we make the Air Force more effective and efficient to be able to engage these targets more successfully. So I think rather than say use the Nigerian military, rather, I think we should improve the intelligence collection processes, invest in drones, like I said earlier. All this would help our Air Force to better engage these targets rather than, yeah, thank you.
And this statistic shows, very erroneous operational errors, like you rightfully put. But there's another side we're looking at, and that is the impact on the community. In a country that has a trust deficit, do you see this trust deficit between the citizens and the security agencies? Do you see this gap widening in terms of this deficit, and like with these errors that we're seeing, operational errors and these lives that has been impacted?
Yes, quite. I think that much is obvious. The trust deficit is obviously going to widen. And it is not just because these incidents occur, it's also about what happens after these incidents have occurred. So what we see most of the time is that the Nigerian military, they either deny at all that these incidents happened, and much later they now come back to confirm that, okay, it happened and they are sorry about it. So this is not really the way to go. I think the Nigerian military needs to be more transparent. They need to communicate more. And we also need to see people being held accountable for all these erroneous strikes, so to say. So the fact that, for example, the most recent one that happened in Zamfara, they acknowledged the fact that they engaged some bandits in the area, but they also heard that some civilians were killed and they were going to investigate. I think that's not enough. There needs to be some level of transparency because transparency breeds trust. So we are not seeing that in status quo, and that is quite worrisome.
David, I don't want you to go too far. I don't want you to go too far because I want to use that as a reference, the recent one that happened in Zamfara. Now, this is a very unique kind of story because the people who were eventually targeted actually happened to be vigilantes who had gone to go, confront insurgents themselves successfully. And on their way back, they were mistaken for insurgents. So it takes me back to my other question regarding the kind of intel gathering or intelligence, the gathering that the Air Force or the Nigerian military uses. Do they go into the population to extract information, or do they just arbitrarily say, these must be bandits because they move like bandits, so let's target them? What exactly is the format that they use or that they should be using at this point, noting that our systems and formats for engagement are old, like you noted from the start?
So talking about intel collection, so there are several sources of intel collection. You obviously have the human sources where they have people on the ground who are providing intelligence. There are also imagery, the use of satellites. Like I said, drones, the Nigerian military do sometimes also use drones. So there are several sources of intelligence. And with regards to your question about what they should be doing, I think they should be more effective in what they're doing. It's not as if they don't do intel collection. As you rightly pointed, it was the vigilantes that went to engage the bandits that were eventually neutralized. So in that kind of situation, it is quite possible that someone have given intel that, okay, there are armed groups in those areas. However, in the process of engaging the so-called armed group, they mistook the vigilantes to be the armed group. So in that kind of situation, it is not just a question of, okay, are they really, or the intel, the type of intel, it's about the accuracy. So I think they need to do more of everything. They need to do more of imagery, intel collection. They need to do more of human
and verification.
I didn't hear you.
I said and verification.
And verification, obviously, yes.
I mean, and I think to me, one of the things that should be part there when it comes to recommendation is a synergy between the local vigilantes that are in these communities, especially around the border towns, because there's a lack of presence of the local security, and by local security agencies I mean the police. Not saying they're not there, but it's sparse, especially for those areas that are far-flung and at the border town. And so we have to talk about a synergy between the local intelligence, that's the vigilantes, and the security forces, whether it's the Air Force, whether it's the military, or whether it's the civil corps as well. There has to be a synergy. But let's also put in focus the lives that have been impacted by this era by the Nigerian Air Force. Do you think there's going to be ample compensation to them? And have we seen from recent or from past incidents like this where the families have been compensated, and there's been some level of transparency and accountability regarding the means of compensation to those families?
Yes, I agree with you. The issue of compensation is really crucial, because what happens in a situation where there is no adequate compensation is that most of these young people, or the children or the wives, they are left to suffer. So with regards to the issue of compensation, there is not enough transparency. Like we don't know that these people are actually being compensated. What we know is that, okay, in quotes, whenever such incidents happen, that there's meant to be compensation. However, there's little or no transparency with regards to whether these people are compensated at all. And that is quite worrisome. That is quite worrisome, given what we know and how these terrorist groups and bandits recruit people. They mostly recruit people who are vulnerable, people who have no means of livelihood. So yeah, I think there needs to be increased transparency around compensation. People need to know that, okay, that these victims are being compensated.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, there's another case about risks management, so to speak. I mean, if you must conduct your duties, we understand that you're trying to tackle terrorist insurgency, try to curb it to the minimum. Our border towns are porous, but there also needs to be a conversation of risk management in whatever it is, whether it's data gathering or airstrikes or targets. Risk management needs to be discussed when it comes to the lives and properties of the average Nigerian in these towns.
Well, David, want to say thank you to you and also to SBM for that very interesting report there and the research that went into that report that was put out. Thank you very much, David.